I am going to go over the client's rights and responsibilities PowerPoint for new hires. My name is Leslie Rowland. I'm one of the social workers here in Building L. Here at Step by Step, we take clients' rights and responsibilities extremely serious. You'll get trainings throughout your time here on different clients' rights, topics. Today we're going to go over a general version of clients' rights and responsibilities and talk about how those clients' rights are implemented at a mental health agency. First, we're going to discuss who is the client. A client is any individual or adult, male or female, or couple who enters into an agreement of service with a service-providing agency. Any child or parent system who enters into an agreement for service with a service-providing agency. Any family system who enters into an agreement, or any individual or system applying for and or receiving mental health services from a board mental health agency. When working with a child as the client, what role does the parent play? You notice in that second paragraph it says any child or parent system. Here at Step by Step, we service children and adolescents between the ages of 2 and 22 years old. And also because our population of special needs, we may still, and though that some of them may turn 18 while they're within our care, their parent might still hold legal guardianship, so it's still a parent-child system. When you're working with adults, it's easy to figure out who the client is. An adult comes into your agency, needs mental health services, they are the primary client. Not their husband, not their children, it's that adult. You may have to work with other members of their family or other service providers to help provide care for that individual, but your main client is that adult. When you're working with a child, it's different. Children are not able to legally make decisions regarding their own safety and welfare, and so the parent steps in as part of that client's system. You provide direct care to the child, however, the parent is involved in making the decisions regarding that care. Here at Step by Step, we also provide case management services to the parent. So as a social worker, the parent is my client as well. When you're working with a child, it doesn't matter how much work you put into working with that child, how much success you've had within that 1-hour session. If that parent isn't on board and you send that child back to that parent system, and they're not willing to go along with the treatment or the services or to make any changes in the home, everything that you've done within that hour can be undone very quickly. It is very important to get the parent involved and on board. Know the client population that you serve. When you're working in a mental health agency, you may be working with various different populations. I've worked with the homeless, I have worked with veterans, I have worked with those with chemical dependency, I have worked in impoverished neighborhoods, I have worked with women, I've worked with men. It is very important to understand the client population that you are working with. And then cultural competency is a big part of clients' rights, and we will talk about cultural competency in the next presentation. Self-efficacy and self-determination. This is a big thing in social work, and it's basic social needs. It's what individuals need in order to feel like they are valued and validated in this world. Clients' rights deals with a lot of self-efficacy and self-determination. The right to be treated with consideration and respect for personal dignity, autonomy, and privacy. To serve in a humane setting, which is the least restrictive. To be informed of one's own condition or proposed or current services. To consent to or refuse any service, treatment, or therapy upon full explanation and or expected consequences. To have the freedom from unnecessary restraint, seclusion, or excessive medications. To be informed of and therein to refuse any unusual or hazardous treatment. To be informed of all rights. To exercise any or all rights without appraisal or of any form. To be free of any psychological or emotional abuse, humiliation, threatening. To be informed of or consent to or refuse observation by other techniques such as one-way mirrors, tapings, video recordings. This may seem very silly to some, but if you think about it, would you go into your doctor's office and accept medications for a diagnosis that hasn't been explained to you? Or a treatment without understanding the risk of that treatment? Let's see. Have you ever been given a diagnosis and then your doctor refused to tell you what that means? So to have these type of rights in place really protects the client. So what does that mean? Any individual or family who comes into contact with this agency should be automatically looked upon as equal without having assumptions made or negative perceptions placed upon him or her or them due to the individual's or family's background or culture. There's that word again, culture, socioeconomic status, sexuality, race, ethnicity, religion, age group, social group, geographic group, peer group, etc. Can a person's mental health diagnosis or disability be a type of culture? And you guys can take a second to think about that, but the answer is yes. Any group that a person belongs to by way of beliefs, similar experiences, similar circumstances, can be considered a type of culture. And you have certain mental health diagnoses that, they share similar symptoms, similar ways of looking at the world, similar ways that the world looks at them. So the answer is yes. Unintentional rights violations versus intentional rights violations. Many times with unintentional rights violations, these are not rights violations that an individual is doing on purpose, or intending to hurt anyone, or trying to violate anyone's rights. Most of the time they come about quite unintentionally. The person is not even aware that it might be happening or how their behaviors could lead to clients' rights violations. For one, losing compassion, tolerance, and patience with consumers due to burnout, having low or no expectations for client progress, personal and or workplace frustrations, and losing hope that any real change will or can ever be made. If you take a second and think about how that could possibly be a rights violation. You're not harming anyone per se. You're not physically abusing anyone per se. You're not neglecting them of information or anything like that. So how could losing your compassion be an unintentional rights violation? Well, if you think about it, if you no longer have compassion or empathy for the person that you're working with and putting all this energy into, how patient are you going to be with that individual? How tolerant are you going to be with their behaviors or their needs? How much effort are you going to put into meeting those needs and caring for that person? If you have low or no expectations for the client's progress, which can happen, sometimes here at Step by Step we may have a very low functioning consumer who, their acquisition rate is very slow. They may take a much longer time acquiring a skill or decreasing a behavior, and it can become very daunting to someone who's working with that consumer day in and day out. And when you start losing hope that any change can be made and that you're not really expecting that consumer to make any type of progress, you sort of stop putting the effort in. You stop working as hard as you could work with that consumer because you don't think that anything's going to come out of it. You might start slacking off during your time with that consumer and not really following his or her program. Not being mindful of your own limitations and human staff, and placing ourselves in situations we cannot mentally or emotionally deal with. And this does not mean that you're a bad employee. You know, a lot of times here we have super BTs. They love their jobs, they love their consumers, and they just want to be the best and do the best at all times, and they don't want to be pulled out, or they don't want to be considered unequipped to work with a certain consumer. But if you're not honest about being tired, about being burnt out, about having high anxiety, about not being sure if you can work with a certain level of aggression, and you throw yourself into that type of situation, what good are you going to be for that consumer and your other coworkers who may be relying on you? Not being aware or honest about one's own trauma history and placing oneself in positions to work with aggressive clients. An individual may come to work here because they've experienced things in life, in their personal life, and they want to help and they want to give back and they want to do good. However, if you've been in a victim of domestic violence or some other type of abuse, or you've experienced traumatic stress, and you put yourself in a high anxiety situation with a highly aggressive consumer, that is not only unhealthy for you as the individual, but it's not safe for the child either. Not being fully aware of trauma-informed care and having that understanding of an individual's background, home life, abuse, and neglect, etc. This may not always apply to BTs because you may not necessarily be privy to such information. However, you always want to take into consideration that there's a lot more to your consumer than you may know. That child's behaviors, that child's sensitivities may be coming from someplace. it may not necessarily even be the diagnosis of autism. You never know where a child is coming from, what their home life entails, how they're communicated with. So you definitely want to be sensitive to those child's needs. A child may be extremely sensitive to touch. So do you want to go in and just automatically start providing tickles and squeezes when you don't really know how that child may respond to them? I want to back up for a second. When we went down the list of clients' rights, and it said the right for being in the least restrictive environment. And it talked a little bit about restraints and medications and things of that nature. Here at Step by Step, we will always definitely work for the child to be in the least restrictive environment. However, I want you to think a little bit further when you're talking about restraints and go beyond like the whole CPI and things like that. But even when you're grabbing a child or trying to block a child, when your adrenaline's pumping and you're moving fast, you may not be realizing how strong you are, or how hard you're blocking, or how hard you're grabbing a child to keep them still. And so really think about those things also. Intentional rights violations. Being an individual worker who basically has a history of aggression or assault, and we're hiring you. That's a rights violation on an agency's part. That's why we really look into background checks, and because you never know a person's history and a person's motivation for getting into jobs like this. Predatorily preying on feeble, helpless, disabled, small, physically low-functioning individuals for any reason. Financially, see it all the time. Nursing homes, agencies such as this where they're working with individuals who cannot defend or communicate. There are individuals who will intentionally seek out these type of job placements because they have access. Luckily here at Step by Step, there's a great deal of supervision and no one's really alone with the consumer. But that is definitely intentional rights violation. Lack of proper staff trainings or consistent monitoring. That is not something you will have to worry about here. You'll get a lot of trainings, a lot of monitoring and staff supervision. But if we didn't, it could leave us wide open for some of the other rights violations. Insufficient emphasis on quality of care, customer service, or cultural competency. This is just very hard to read, I'm sure, but it's just talking about what clients' rights is. It's just good old-fashioned customer service. I don't know how many of you have worked in retail or food or one of those other jobs that you couldn't wait to get away from. But those skills that you could have learned in that environment in terms of listening to the individual, giving a guarantee, doing what you say you're going to do, being prompt and responsible and thorough in communications, trying to provide the best care possible. That's what clients' rights is about, really. So many of our consumers come in, our clients come in with extremely negative experiences with different service providers and different systems. They're used to being put on hold. They're used to not getting things not getting done. They're sometimes even used to being lied to. So, when you think about clients' rights, think about customer service and think about your own experiences. Whether it was an agency, a hospital, a restaurant, and what you needed from that experience. Clients' rights in the organization. This is just a thorough list of the actual clients' rights that are listed at the Board of Mental Health, and that all our families here at SBSA get a copy of. And it's just, the rights as a consumer, the rights to be involved in participation, the rights to be informed, the rights to confidentiality, the right to access one's own records, the rights to be informed in advance of discontinuation of services, the rights to be free of discrimination, the rights to know the cost of services, the rights to file a grievance, and we're going to talk a little bit about confidentiality. Confidentiality is one of the main client rights. Client confidentiality should be restricted to those staff who are directly involved with the consumer in some way. No client information should be left in clear view at any time, not even in staff's own office. Files and notes should be facing down on the desk. Computers should not have the client information file open. All releases of information should be signed and fully filled out and explained to consumers. Potentially incriminating information should be restricted from being placed on typical agency forms unless otherwise designated for such information. No pictures of clients or drawings or gifts should be received and are displayed with clients' names visible. Clients' names should not be used in titles of emails. Clients should not be identified as being connected with step-by-step in any way unless consent is given by a client. Let's go back a little bit to no pictures of clients and drawings should be received with clients' names visible. That is true in regards to their clients' names. However, at step-by-step, the parents are often extremely grateful and they become extremely attached to their BT. And sometimes they will want to bring in food or give that BT a gift at Christmas time. And that is acceptable here at step-by-step. However, for someone in my position, our ethics prohibit us from being able to accept gifts from consumers or clients. So I guess that would depend on your licensing and what your licensing permits. Now, clients should not be identified as being connected with the agency unless consent is given by the consumer. I've worked at agencies where I've provided mental health therapy for a client and have seen that client out in the community. Well, if the community understands that I'm a therapist and I work for so-and-so agency and I'm going up and talking to this person, they might automatically connect that person to me as being a client of that agency, or just being a mental health consumer. So, in the same way, you may be connected to step-by-step. You see a child out in the neighborhood that you work with and you want to go over to that child and say hello. Well, that parent might not want the community to know that their child has autism or that their child is connected to step-by-step. The best thing to do is to wait and allow that child and that parent to approach you. Also, with BTs, confidentiality can be very tricky. The parents will attempt to build a relationship with you. They see you more often than they see their program manager or their clinic director. You're probably the first person they see in the morning, and they want to tell you all sorts of things that happened last night, which is fine because you can't collect information to give to the program manager. But if they start wanting to tell you details about problem behavior, concerns they have about step-by-step, concerns they have about another BT or another consumer or another family, that is definitely when they start asking questions about what is going on day to day and step by step, or what is going on with their child in programming day by day. You can't speak on the times that you're not directly working with that child. The best thing to do is to always redirect them to your program manager or clinic director or myself or one of the social workers or the social worker for that building. It is a very fine line, and it gets crossed a lot, and you don't want to put yourself in that position. So unless it's carved in stone, I know we like to say that the customer is always right, that the consumer is always right, and a lot of times we really try to collaborate and work with and take into account parents' concerns and questions. However, there are times where the parents will respond in a way that we cannot, that's not acceptable for us. For example, a parent might wish for you to spank their child by applying 2 swats if all treatment methods prove ineffective, and he or she stops behaviors at home after she's been spanked. Sounds crazy, but I've actually heard it before. So, sometimes the parents fail to realize that we are a mental health agency. They want to connect us as to being a school, and they fail to realize that we can't apply the same tactics that they may be applying at home. The parent might become non-compliant and not participating in treatment planning, or you might not ever be able to get a hold of that parent when you need things. The client continues to disregard or break rules or policies and breaches other consumers' confidentiality. Consumer is abusive to staff. This can be parent or child. I know you say that, well, yeah, we have aggressive consumers, but there is a level of aggression where if we can't keep staff safe or that child safe anymore, where we might have to look into other placement. And consumer refuses to follow own treatment plan and cooperatively work with staff. So if mom isn't willing to follow the treatment plans that have been put in place, then we may have to have a meeting. Okay. So, this is going to lead us straight into cultural competency. And it's very important that any agency, whether it's a business, whether it's a mental health agency, whether it's a hospital, cultural competency is becoming a huge issue in agencies, and they're really beginning to train on this a lot more. Cultural competency, the word culture is used because it implies the integrated pattern of human behavior that includes thoughts, communications, actions, customs, beliefs, values, race, ethnicity, religion, or any social group. Culture is often referred to as the totality of ways of being passed from one generation to another generation. Cultural competency implies a heightened consciousness of how clients experience their uniqueness and deal with their differences and similarities within a larger context. This is so important when you're working in any agency, because you're working with people who have stories, people who come from different backgrounds, different belief systems, have different needs, different expectations, different reactions. Unless you are able, or at least willing, to understand where another individual may have come from or may be coming from, you're going to have a hard time connecting with anyone. Whether you're supervising or co-working or working in a position of authority, it's going to be very hard for you to work with individuals, even when you think culture has nothing to do with it. Some people will say we are where we've been, who we come from. Recognizing how personal and professional values may conflict with or accommodate the needs of diverse consumers. This is very important, especially working in any type, working in any type of service position or mental health agency. Your own personal cultures may conflict with the people that you're working with. Your own belief systems, your own background, the way you view the world may very well conflict with your client. So you may be a very religious Christian who came from a very traditional background, and you may have a consumer who is Buddhist or Hindu or Muslim or atheist. How are you able to work with those individuals? Or are you so unable to work with them that you may need to refer them to someone else? Having that understanding, because you don't want to do more harm than good. So we're talking about self-awareness again. Culture is a filter through which people process their experiences and events in their lives. We may have had the same exact experiences in life, but our racial, our ethnic, our religious background, the community that we were raised in, our belief system will cause us to view those experiences very differently than, or our own personal experiences will cause us to view an experience very differently than the person sitting next to us. So seek to develop and understand your own personal cultural values and beliefs. Seek to develop understanding of your own personal biases and the probable biases of your clients. We talked a little bit about your own personal biases, but understand that your consumers or your clients will have biases of their own. I've worked with substance abusers, and they have a lot of trust issues. And one of the first things that any person in treatment will ask you before they will even talk to you is, are you in recovery? Have you had a drug and alcohol problem? How can you work with me if you've never walked in my shoes? Or you may be a young girl straight out of college with not married, no kids, and you may be working with an older woman with 3 kids who's struggling, who's never gone to college, and her first assumption would be, how can you work with me? You don't know me, you don't have, how can you tell me how to raise kids? You don't have kids. So they do come with their own biases also. Cross-cultural knowledge. Have and continue to develop a specialized knowledge and understanding about the history, traditions, and values and family systems of the major client groups that you serve. Not necessarily everyone you come in contact with, but if you serve a large population of a certain culture, it would behoove you to really understand as much as you can about that culture. There's a very large Somali population here at Step by Step, and we try very hard to get as much information about that culture, their expectations, their rituals, what's important to them, how they do things, so that we can work with them respectfully and efficiently. Because even small things, they may do very different than us. Cross-cultural skills. Use appropriate approaches. Oops. Sorry. Okay. Use appropriate approaches, skills, and techniques that reflect the worker's understanding of the role of culture in the helping process. I think here at Step by Step, that might entail just understanding, like again with the Somali population, understanding the importance of who do you greet first? How do you greet them? The whole male-female dynamic. Is there any specific way that they do potty training, or to ensure that we respect some of their religious traditions? Making sure that you understand, making sure the person you are talking to understands the terminology. A lot of times we will use terminology, and Step by Step loves terminology that the parents just do not get. SIBs and CLTs and all of that. Make sure they understand what you're saying. Break the information down to them. Now, what you don't want to do is, I've worked in situations where people have tried to get on a level with the client and using their slang and the way they talk, and trust me, that is just not very effective. What you want to be yourself, but you want to make sure that you respect where your consumer's at also, and that you are able to talk to them and they're able to understand what you're trying to tell them. And be aware that our terminology may be different from where their culture's terminology. The example given is some cultures say yes, which means I hear you more than I agree. Empowerment and advocacy. Be aware of the effect of social policies and programs on diverse client populations, advocating for and with clients whenever possible. Not allowing discrimination of any kind and making it known if you find out that they are experiencing it at another organization. Generalizations based on perceived characteristics of a population being served. This is easy to do. Even with the culture of autism, that we make certain generalizations about, autistic traits. But understand that that is not the definition of a population. we might in our own head think, okay, I'm working with someone who is Muslim, or I'm working with someone who's, Indian. And we may list in our minds all the things we believe we know about that population, but that might not even fit with this person, a specific consumer. So it's good to understand that a person's culture and a person's awareness may go beyond stereotypes. Language diversity. Seek to provide and advocate for the provision of information and materials in specific languages to the population. If you aren't sure, ask. Striving for cultural competence. Workers should always have a knowledge base of their clients' cultures and be able to demonstrate competence in the provision of services that are sensitive to client cultures and to differences among people and cultural groups. Do not be afraid to ask questions, as most people respond very positively to inquiries about their culture. Some of my Somali moms, we've had very long conversations about the Somali culture, and they've enjoyed teaching me and telling me about the way they view even mental health services. We're going to go over a little bit of an example of how different cultures may view the same experience. We're going to talk about poverty, we're going to talk about poverty, middle class, and wealth as three different cultures and how they view different aspects of life. So, for example, the culture of poverty, everything is relative. And for the middle class, schools and businesses operate from middle class norms. So the culture of poverty, sorry about flipping back and forth and all of my pop-ups here. We're going to look at how these three different cultures view possessions. So, the culture of poverty, people who live below the poverty line or even right at the poverty line, their possession is people, family, friends, community. That's what is important to them. The middle class culture, what's important is things, objects, toys, houses, cars, clothes. For the wealthy, one-of-a-kind objects, legacies, and pedigrees. When it comes to time, the culture of poverty believes that the present is most important. Decisions are made from the moment based on feelings of survival. For the middle class, the future is most important. Decisions are made against future ramifications. Do I save now for the house I want later? For the culture of wealth, tradition and history are most important. Decisions are made based on tradition and decorum. When it comes to money, anyone who is brought up in the culture of poverty, it's to be used, spent. You don't know when you're going to get it again. You're not used to having it. You're going to use it. For middle class, it's to be managed, saved, 401ks, CDs. For the wealthy, it's to be conserved and invested. When it comes to food, anyone in survival mode in the culture of poverty is, did I get enough to eat? For the middle class is, did I like what I ate? And for the wealthy, it was what I ate presented well. Clothing, very similar, valued for individual style or expression. The middle class is valued for the quality and labels. For wealthy, it's valued for the artistic sense of expression. Designer is important. And even when it comes to language, there is a different language in the culture of poverty, low income, lower status, where the language is casual, or it might be slang, or it might be a way to communicate with each other where no one else understands what they're communicating. The middle class is very formal. Language is about negotiation. And for the wealthy, it's formal, but language is about networking. The next 3 slides on here is a little quiz that one of my coworkers came up with to see if you could survive living in the culture of poverty, the culture of middle class, and the culture of wealth. If you would like, you can do that. It might be fun. Other examples of culture and diversity is gender, race, religion, sexual orientation, customs, daily occurrences. Let's see. How culture applies to our work. When culture is ignored, families and individuals are at risk of not getting the support they need, or worse, receiving assistance that is more harmful than helpful. Culture drives where, when, how support is needed, who to seek support from, and how we attempt to provide support. Cultural biases can block both consumers and providers from accessing support through generalizations, expectations, separation, and discrimination. For our clients, make sure that you do not assume their culture, their ethnicity, their preferences. Ask how they would like to be addressed. Is there a certain way of doing things that we might not know? That they hold similar beliefs or similar values as others in their culture. And do not assume that dominant culture of your beliefs are superior, which does happen sometimes. So you have to be able to be very neutral. And then there's just a little quiz at the end, which you may or may not have to take. Before I try to turn this projector off, and I thank you very much for being patient. I am not mechanically inclined at all. So, again, I'm really sorry about the pop-ups. But before we go, staying on the track of cultural competency, I want to talk a little bit about the autistic community and the culture of autism. Characteristics of the autism community is language, similar challenges, economic issues, similar beliefs, stigmas, norms, subcultures, politics, provider sensitivity, problems with how the system works with the autistic community. Language, diagnosis or identity. Language is a big issue in the culture of autism. You may hear people say, I'm an autistic person. Some might say, I'm a person with autism. On the right, you'll see different little terminologies used within the autism community. They may use them, some may use them within the autism community. However, they may be viewed as derogatory by individuals who aren't in the autistic community. Challenge is anyone listening. Wellness versus unwellness. In the autism, In the culture of autism, there is a great deal of depression because of chronic stress, lack of sleep, increasing debt, isolation, chronic worry and anxiety, lack of outlets, loss of personal identity, lack of support systems, and unresolved grief. They faced varied amount of challenges in getting services, finding care within the school system, the workforce, what happens when they're no longer children and they become adults, who will take care of them, where will they live, what do they do when there's nowhere else to go, residential versus intensive care, economical, the cost of care, finding debt, red tape. Politics, there is an autism rights movement which encourages society to accept people with autism as they are without modifying behaviors. Believes society should learn to tolerate harmless behaviors. Many people disagree with the movement because of their view of the gifts associated with autism and the possible jeopardizing of funding and treatment. This is just a little bit about working with the adult who has autism. We here are beginning to open up an adult day facility for adults with autism, so that just talks a little bit about some of the challenges that adults with autism face. There are subcultures within the culture of autism. We have the African American subculture, where there's a big mistrust of systems, low expectations for quality of care. Some still view mental illness as a moral issue and a weakness, tend to lean more toward faith and cultural traditions for healing rather than doctors. Lack of access to or unfamiliar with educational, diagnostic treatment and medical services. Believe that discipline, not treatment, is needed. Then there's the Hispanic and Native American subculture. Very similar to the African American subculture, except that some report that 50% of children with autism are not diagnosed within this subculture. Delayed services and interventions. The Somali are various African subcultures. Again, mistrust of systems, language barrier, belief that special needs child is a personal failure as a mother, tendency for fathers to blame the mother for not birthing a normal child, avoidance of diagnosis due to shame or fear, and belief that mental illness is possession or angry spirit which requires spiritual healing. You may talk to some of our Somali families and they will tell you that there is no such thing as autism in Somali, or they have various beliefs on what could cure their child of autism, and you can't discredit their belief system. You may not validate it, but you can't discredit it. Asian culture, subcultures, strict social standards of acceptable behavior, so their parents may be very focused on the child's behaviors. Extended family plays a large role with the parent. There's social pressure on parents regarding the child, lower rate of understanding. In Indian cultures, problems with misdiagnoses in Indian cultures, social lack of awareness and resources to treat autism. And this is just a little poem if you want to read it. So I threw that in there just so that you can basically, and a couple links to some really interesting videos. But I threw that in there so that you can understand that even within just being generally culturally competent, your agency may work with a specific population or culture that you really need to become familiar with, because these are the consumers that you're working with on a day in and day out basis. More complicated, each culture and each population has a subculture. So there's more than just one pull on that client. There's more than just one influence that is affecting how they may or may not behave. If it were just one-dimensional and we could say, okay, well, all African Americans behave this way and view this way, it might make things a lot easier. But you can't, because not all African Americans are come from the same background, raised the same way, had the same childhood experiences, from the same neighborhoods. A gay white male from the inner city may view things very differently than a straight white male from the inner city. So that one variable may be different and totally change their outlook on life, what's important to them, what's not important to them. So it's just very good to become aware of these things when you're dealing with people, because we may not always understand, why does so-and-so act like that? Or why does she react this way? Well, it might be their culture. It might be her her background that influences the way she looks at things. So that's all I have. Again, I am so sorry that my email popped up and everything else, and hopefully this is enough for you. And I guess that you'll see me definitely, if anyone's going to be in Building L, that's where I'm at. And that is